Welcome to Got Grass, conversations with the legends and leaders of bluegrass. You've enjoyed live bluegrass at Guitar Town CT concerts in Hamden, Connecticut since 2008. From Tony Rice, Rouse Stanley, and Doyle Lawson to Tim O'Brien, Sierra Hull, and Billy Strings. Now you can go behind the scenes as we chat with your favorite bluegrass stars. I'm your podcast host, Chris Worth. So my guest today on Got Grass is Mr. Jimmy Gaudreau. So welcome, Jimmy.
Thank you for having me.
When I started doing this podcast 2.5 years ago, I made a list of people I wanted to talk to, and you were way up at the top of the list. So it's taken a while. It's taken a while, but I'm glad you're here. Thanks for coming on. Appreciate it.
My pleasure.
I just wanted to mention, first of all, because I know one of the reasons that it's taken a while is that you've been working on your website, and Jimmy has a wonderful new website, jimmygaudreau.com, which I encourage everyone to visit. It's got some great photos of you and your career with various musicians, a bio and a list of a lot of mandolins you've played and comments about them. So it's if you're interested in bluegrass and mandolin and Jimmy Gaudreau, I'd check out this website. It's very good. Just wanted to put that plug in. Yeah.
Yeah, I might mention it's a redesigned website because I had one up. The previous version was up for around 14 years, but it served a different purpose back then because I was actively playing, performing, and selling CDs and soliciting dates. And, it served a different purpose. And after I retired, which, I am of the retired classification these days. So I wanted to have something different to talk about my career a little bit, but mostly about the instruments and stuff that was that would be of interest to mandolin players.
Yeah. Well, it seems to me that through my conversations with you, that you have a very kind of thoughtful and careful approach to your musical legacy. Is that fair to say?
That's debatable, actually, because a lot of people think that I had a very kind of loose, somewhat reckless, adventurous, roguish, whatever approach to mandolin. And that's because, to start out with, I'm self-taught. I don't have really any formal training, any real technique, and therefore I have shied away from doing mandolin camps and other teaching things throughout the years only because being self-taught, I don't want to pass on my bad habits that worked for me really good. But technically, there's a lot of imperfections. And that was pointed out to me early on when I started doing workshops at festivals and things. They'd say, "Oh, you want to do a mandolin workshop? Sure, why not?" And get out there and do a mandolin workshop, and somebody says, "Why are you using that finger to play that note, or using this progression, or different things that were like technically incorrect?" But again, I don't think about them because they always work for me. So, I just don't want to be the professor, the guy giving lessons or instructions. And like Alan Bybee, for instance, my very good friend, and what a mandolin player this guy is. And known him for years and years, and he's been trying to get me down to one of his mandolin camps in South Carolina. And he said, "Jimmy, it's not the way that you are such a technician. It's just that some of my students want to see how you do it." And I said, "Yeah, but I really don't want to do it that way, and I really don't want to be out in front of a crowd and have to explain." And so he's been trying for the last 10 years to get me down there, and I keep saying, no, I won't do it.
I was going to get to mandolin playing later, but let's keep talking about mandolin because that's obviously a big part of your career and yourself. Could you describe, you mentioned you're kind of a rogue player. You had your own style. Could you describe your style, or is that impossible to do in words? Is it just your style?
Well, um, you know, let's say I'm kind of like Bill Monroe in the way that when I picked up a mandolin, um, it came to me. I wasn't looking to play a mandolin. I just happened to be at a jam session, a bluegrass jam session, to watch the banjo player. Not, back in those early days of my interest in bluegrass, that's what I was listening to, and that's what I wanted to play. So I go to this jam session, and lo and behold, somebody brought a mandolin and said, "You need to be playing mandolin because you sing tenor." And I said, "Oh, really?" And then and they basically had to say, "Well, that's Bill Monroe." Bill who? you know, I was that naive and that so uh, unaccustomed to, or I didn't know much about what a mandolin was, except it was tuned like a fiddle. That's it.
Mm-hmm.
So I got into mandolin then and said, okay, I started out playing like ukulele, which graduated quickly to guitar. And then I wanted to play like Luther Perkins, in the Johnny Cash band because it was easy, kind of easy stuff to learn. And my first musical endeavors included forming a band in high school, Jimmy G and the Jaguars,
Mm-hmm.
where I played electric guitar, self-taught again, had no lessons, but it seemed to work, and just a bunch of kids having fun playing music. But I took that with me after picking up a mandolin and said, you know, I've got these licks in my head from playing guitar. And then I started listening to fiddle players, steel players, electric guitar players. And I got to say, my favorite all time guitar player back then was Lonnie Mack, the
Mm.
guy that cut the instrumental version of Memphis. When I heard that, I went crazy because the second break that he took on that was one of the most beautiful solos to this day that I've ever heard in my entire life. And it just carried over to the mandolin, all that stuff. Like, okay, I'm teaching myself to play a mandolin. I have these licks in my head. I'm going to start applying them to a mandolin. Just that simple.
Yeah. So getting down to real basics here, I know a lot of mandolin players hold a pick a certain way. They kind of, it's like shake hands. You put it on your second joint of your index finger and you put your thumb over it and you play with a closed fist, kind of like Chris Thile, which I find impossible. But see you hold the mandolin with your thumb and forefinger out and kind of play it that way with a lot of wrist movement, which is kind of the way I've been teaching myself just by nature. So is that just the way it naturally came to you to hold it that way and pick that way? Or
Yeah, nobody
I
showed
assume
me how to
so.
hold a pick. And that was basically the same way I held a pick playing an electric guitar. There was, you didn't think of downstrokes and upstrokes and all of that kind of stuff, which you do on a mandolin. You develop downstrokes after you start learning how to play chops. And again, back in that first session where somebody pointed a mandolin to me, they said, okay, you can figure out melody on this thing, but you're going to have to learn how to play chop if you're going to play bluegrass. And I said, what's a chop? And he said, well, you got to put these fingers down and dampen them, blah, blah, blah. So I learned how to do that and then figured out, oh, that involves a downstroke. Okay, so taught myself that, learned how to chop a mandolin, and learned all those Bill Monroe chords or positions, to play those kind of chords. But it just uh, my playing evolved from then, and it changed over the years. I really never changed the way that I held the pick, only because it was comfortable to me.
Yeah.
So I continue to do so.
Yeah. I've been playing, I'm a guitar player by whatever, but I started playing mandolin 2 years ago, which is why I'm interested in all your mandolin answers. Because I watch your chop too. You play a really, it's almost like a snap of your wrist kind of chop, whereas someone like Sam Bush, it's all like a forearm strum.
Mhm.
You have a real quick snap. You do those triplet kind of things up and down on the strings with your wrist, which I've noticed is a characteristic of your playing a lot. That kind of that strum kind of thing you do during your rhythm playing, which is, I guess that's again just the way you hear it and play it, right?
You know what? I have to confess that I got that. I adapted that style from listening to John Duffy,
Oh.
who when I started playing with the country store, or not the country store, pardon me, um, the Twin River Boys, which was the band we formed in Rhode Island, my first uh, uh, bluegrass band that I was ever in, amateur, you know. Uh, excuse me, my other phone is ringing. Uh, so anyway, I'll mute that. But John Duffy had a rhythm lick rather than a chop that I just kind of gravitated to, and it's the chop is incorporated into the lick, accented, but it's not a cut off. Not that. It's like that.
Mhm.
Sorry, that's the. I have to do it verbally because I don't have a mandolin in my
No, no,
hands.
that's perfect. That's just what it sounds like to me. Perfect. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Um, I see also that you do a lot of cross picking kind of stuff. Is that mostly on slower songs? Just because you can't really cross pick on a super fast song, kind of like the Jesse McReynolds style of cross pick. Is that like a solo technique that you like on slower songs, or?
Yeah, again, adapted from him. I
Yeah.
mean, uh, when I did mandolin workshops, um, people would always ask from the audience, you know, or the attendees, say, "Well, can you demonstrate a cross picking style?" And if that question was posed to me, I would always say, "Well, yes, but it would be my version because." And my standard answer was, "There's Jesse McReynolds and there's everybody else." You know, there's people that copy Jesse McReynolds,
Hmm.
and I happen to be one of them, but I am not, you know, I don't do things exactly the way that he did them. I just adapted that kind of style to my playing, and I use it when I feel like it. Some of it is not even preconceived. You know, I'll tell you, with all of the bands that I played with, and if you look at my discography on on my website, people say that's an amazing amount of albums that you've been on or played on with other people, and I have to tell you that I never went into the studio with a preconceived notion of what I was going to play. It just came out, you know. And Tony Royce, for example, really liked that. He said, "I don't want to hear a break that you already had memorized. You know, you knew that we were going to record this song on a certain day, but when you come into the studio, I want you to stand in front of that microphone and play what comes out." And that I love that, you know, and I you know, would get to listen to the playbacks and at least have some say so in, yeah, I think that's pretty good, or I'm going to get back in there and try it again, or whatever. But I was pretty satisfied, and he was as well. You know, you had to satisfy the boss. So, and if you listen to any of my breaks on any albums, I can pretty much say with for sure that I just went into the studio and did whatever came into my head, and if I felt it was good enough or to my liking, I left it.
Hmm.
Just that simple.
I think a lot of players have a hard time with that concept, the Tony Rice concept, where basically no rehearsals, no sound check, just get up there and play what comes to you. I know that's the way he was, but I
Yeah.
think a lot of players would have a hard time with that because they're not either confident enough in their ability or whatever or their ear to like just rip it off without planning it all out. It's a very admirable and musical way to be, but I think a lot of players maybe have a hard time with that.
Well, Tony had a philosophy, and I learned that early on, even before the actual band came together. He he moved from California back to the East Coast with the intention of starting a band. I was working with the Country Gentlemen at the time, and we met up. And I was also living in Warrenton, Virginia, which is like 40 minutes from where I'm living now, closer to DC. But he came to my house and we had some, uh, just picked around and he said, "Look, I want to put together a band, um, and as opposed to the band that I had in California, which was the Tony Rice Unit instrumental band, you know, he didn't sing. Nobody sang in that band. It was strictly a kind of a spin-off of the David Grisman quartet,
Mhm.
and that's But he said this is going to be a different band. He said it's going to be vocal, and one of the reasons that I'm approaching you about it is because I like your tenor singing, and even I don't compare myself to any other mandolin player, especially, he'd been playing out there in years with John Reichman, one of my favorite players. I mean, my God, this guy can really play a mandolin. So Tony said, I don't expect you to play the stuff like John Reichman. He says, this is not going to be, we'll touch on a little jazz stuff here and there. He says, but you play what you play and sing tenor like I know you can. So we hit a few licks and he says, that's what I'm talking about right there, that blend. He says, that's money. you know, he says, we'll Wyatt was going to be a third member of the band, and he's a non-singer. So eventually, we recruited Mark Schatz, who I had played with in Spectrum, great bass player, and a decent baritone singer. So we had a good trio, and we operated as a four-piece band for quite a while.
Does singing tenor come naturally to you? You know the melody of the song, you just hear it in your head. You don't have to. You just get it. You sing it along with it, right? Is that
That's
just
exactly right. Yeah, and again, going back to that first encounter with the mandolin, the guy that was playing guitar in that session said, "You sing great tenor. You need to be playing mandolin." And I was a tenor singer first long before I was a mandolin player. I mean, with Jimmy G and the Jaguars, we were doing all of the rock and roll hits and a lot of Beatles tunes. So I was the Paul McCartney in that band,
hmm hmm
singing the high stuff.
Yeah. I know you've performed with in bands and sung harmony with some of the really great singers of our time. I'm thinking about Charlie Waller and Keith Whitley and Tony. Um, I assume those all those lead singers brought out a different side of your singing, like I don't know, a different whatever. Is that
Some you could naturally fall in with, like Charlie
yeah,
Waller. That
yeah.
was that was an easy thing because his enunciation was so good and his pitch was so good. Not I I won't say that my voice blended that well with him because when I go back and listen to early recordings of after I joined the Country Gentlemen, like New Look, New Sound, and the other albums that I cut with them, my voice stood out in a different way as opposed to John Duffy's, who's also stood out, but it was a different texture. It was that first album that we cut was appropriately titled New Look, New Sound. And it was definitely a new sound because I didn't sing or play like John Duffy.
Yeah.
So, but he was an easy one to fall in with. Whitley, on the other hand, was one of the hardest singers that I ever stepped in the studio with. He pushed me to my limits as far as um, pitch or I know my range, basically mid range up to A comfortably, B flat, pushing B almost to the falsetto style. I had to really scream to hit a B note, and and Whitley had a high range to begin with, so a lot of that stuff, if you go back and listen to the stuff that I got with him, uh, in my Hall Ain't in the Hall of Fame, yeah, the second J.D. Crowe album. He really pushed me on that one, and some of the playbacks. I said, "Yuck," and he said, he says, "You can do it, Jimmy. Get back in there and do it." So, oh
Yeah.
man, it hurt.
It's funny you mentioned because I know Charlie Waller and Tony Rice both had very clear voices. You could understand every note, every word.
Yeah,
It was
enunciation was.
straightforward, and that must be much easier for a harmony singer because you know what to expect versus some of these singers today that kind of swallow their words. I don't know. It just seems like some of those old singers really sang it out clearly.
I have to agree with that, and I don't want to elaborate on it because uh, I know exactly what you're talking about, and um, I have to admit that I'm somewhat out of the loop these days, being a retired player. I listen. Um, Sirius XM is all over the place these days, and I don't have it in my own car, but my wife does, and we listen to all of the music that we like to hear. But a lot of the newer things, I have to look or put my ear up to it, and I say, I can't understand what this lead singer is really saying here. The enunciation just is, what are they doing? Why are they famous?
Yeah, I have that problem. There's especially some very good female bands that I won't mention, but I just the singers have beautiful voices, but you just cannot understand the lyrics. And if you can't understand the lyrics of a bluegrass song, it's kind of
I
like, what is
know.
the point?
Yeah, what's the point? Is
Yeah, I've
but
heard some like that. I'm gonna pick your brain a little bit and see if you remember. So
oh
no, on YouTube there's a Tony Res Unit concert from I think it's 86 in California, maybe Strawberry Park or Strawberry Festival.
yeah, okay,
I
that
know it
was in
was really
Yosemite.
cold. It was really cold on stage because Tony kept saying it's cold as hell out there. And
Yeah, that was at Yosemite, and that
oh,
was
okay.
the elevation and the time of year, and it was you could see your breath.
So I've watched that quite a few times, and the set started out at breakneck tempo and just went breakneck plus. I mean, every song was so fast. Maybe he was just trying to get through it and get off. I don't know. I've never
Mhm.
heard the unit play that fast for every song. I mean, from Little Sadie to you name it. It was you, Tony, Wyatt, and Mark Schatz. It was just a quartet.
Yeah,
I don't know if you're
yeah,
familiar with that. Remember that particular night or that quartet, but that was just struck me like how fast and clean everybody could play. I remember watching this thing, and Wyatt, who was probably only like 20 or 21 at the time, was looking over at Tony and you like almost like, what are you guys doing here? So
yeah. That
fast.
was a typical deer in the headlights look that he would give when he was uncomfortable because that was his purpose in the band. To be the strong backup rhythm player. Because and between uh, Tony and Wyatt and Schatz, it was what I refer to as a big wall of rhythm. And if Tony started something quick, you had to keep up. That was just part of it. And as a matter of fact, I'll tell you what, I wasn't aware of that being out on YouTube, but I'm going to go looking for it. Just now you've kind of made me curious to see how fast that stuff really was. And I know that, well, I can say without hesitation that back then I could play a lot faster than I can now. It's
Mhm.
just, over the years, you kind of lose a little bit for one reason or another. I
Yep.
can play a lot of the licks, but I can't play at that speed. No.
Yeah. So, do you think was Tony kind of trying to push the envelope to see how fast you guys could play, or it was just his nature? He just liked to play fast.
It just, it, no, it wasn't really his nature. It just happened to be uh, the day and the time, I guess. He just felt like it, or maybe that cold, damp air out there, or I guess it wasn't really damp, but it was altitude. Again, we were at Yosemite, so maybe a little lightheadedness. I don't know from the
Yeah.
altitude, but I can probably say with for certainty that that was not the normal way we would go on stage, or we didn't go with the intention of playing anything that fast.
Yeah. Do you remember singing harmony on all those Gordon Lightfoot songs that Tony liked to do? I mean, he would slow. Those are the ones he would slow down and really, you really get the emotion of this voice. And your voice and Tony's really, really blended perfectly to me. I can't think of two other singers. He and Ricky Skaggs had a nice blend, but I feel like you guys' voices almost. It was almost sometimes hard to tell who was singing what part. It was so together. Um, but especially on some of those Lightfoot songs that were slower, you could really hear the harmonies beautifully.
Well, like I said earlier on in the interview here, um, when he first came to my house and I was getting the tryout, so to speak, to see if we actually had any kind of chemistry that was going to work. That is the first thing that he noticed. He said, "That's what I'm talking about." The blend was there, so that was my shoe in, or my passing of the test that our voices matched, and that's what he wanted because this was going to be a vocal band, and it stuck all the way through. All through his vocal years, let's put it that way. And I adapted to him as he adapted. How do I say this to himself? His voice kind of, you could see wear and tear on it over the years. We started the band in '85, and by like '88, when Ricky Simpkins joined the band, you could tell that he had developed a lot of bad habits. As a matter of fact, I'll tell you one little story. Moondy Klein, who I worked with, of course, in Chesapeake and in various duo things after that, was a trained vocalist brought up in New York. He and his brother were both members or got into the Metropolitan Opera children's chorus. So he was a trained vocalist. And he'd come down to the Birchmere and see the Tony Rice unit. And one time he approached me and said, you know, somebody ought to tell Tony that he's singing incorrectly. He sings he says, I watch him from the audience and I kind of cringe because I see the muscles in his throat and where he's singing from and kind of growling it out and not using his diaphragm in the way that it would make it much easier for him to sing and possibly, not be so hard on his vocal cords. And I said, I'm not going to be the one to tell him that. But he continued to sing like Tony Rice. And sure enough, by like the early 90s, he was having a tough time of it.
Yeah.
So anyway,
Yeah.
but I still, as he regressed vocally, I adapted to it and still was able to sing tenor to him right up till the unit, dissolved.
Yeah. So when Ricky joined the band on fiddle and a third harmony, did you and Ricky have to work out in advance, like how your parts would work with the melody, or because you were used to singing the tenor part to
Oh,
Tony?
no, I
Now,
always sing the tenor part.
right.
Yeah.
So now Ricky comes in. Now he's kind of find a spot maybe between you two, or he wasn't singing a baritone part, or was he sometimes?
Yes, he was
He was.
actually. Yeah. Yeah. Tony was able to sing baritone in any of the trios that we ever did, but chose not to because he was the lead singer and
Mm,
the his voice still stood out in the mix, and it was supposed to because it was the Tony Rice unit. So Ricky has an amazing range, as a matter of fact. And to quote another or instance where we worked together in Carolina Star, which was John Starling's band, that
mm,
was hired for 2 years or 2 seasons to be Emmylou Harris's backup band. And Emmy, of course, sung the high part in that vocal blend, and I sung right under her, which put me right at my limitations all the
mm,
time. And then Ricky sung below me um, most of the time. Sometimes we'd actually switch off, but uh, by and large, he was singing low tenor to her high lead, and I was singing high baritone. So he was very versatile and he had a great range.
mhm.
Still does, as
Yeah.
far as I know.
So when you're singing below a female lead, I mean, speaking for myself, trying to find a harmony part above, I grew up listening to the Beatles too and Everly Brothers. So trying to find
Yeah,
the harmony above was pretty easy because you heard this music constantly. It just was in your head. But when I teach these bluegrass classes locally and there's female leads, I find it much harder to find the voice below that's harmonically good. In fact, sometimes I'll sing the female lead an octave below and then go above that to find the part. Do you have any difficulty finding a harmony part below a high lead, or does it just still come naturally to you?
no, no, and I'll tell you why, because I also grew up listening to the Osborne brothers with
Mm,
Bobby Osborne singing high lead and Sonny singing the part below him, and the guitar player, whoever that happened to be, sung the low tenor part. So I learned to not only be, I was in Bobby's range, sort of, but I also listened to Sonny, who was the consummate middle guy. You know, his voice took up a lot of space because it was so thick and just blended as brothers do with Bobby. But uh, uh, Sonny was singing the baritone part just under Bobby.
mhm. Yeah.
And it just came natural after listening to them. Oh, I can do that. So when it came to a situation like working with Emmy Lou, oh, I can do that. It's in my range.
Yeah.
Why not? You know.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. As you can probably guess, Tony was the first concert we ever produced here. He played here 4 times, and he really was my bluegrass hero. And the band that he had, that band you're talking about, when Ricky and Ronnie were in there, and you and Wyatt, to me, that was the best Tony Rice band ever. I don't know. I just thought the whole chemistry, the vocals, it just worked in every way. I guess Tony had kind of lost a little bit of his voice. As you say, I can hear him having struggling with some of the high parts, even in the mid 80s on
yeah,
recordings.
yeah.
And things slowed down a bit. It was just like, to me, the ultimate. I don't know how you feel about it. You've been in a lot of bands, a lot of great bands. To me, that was one of the greatest bands ever. Was that five,
You know
Ricky
what? I
Wyatt?
won't argue with you on that one because I have to absolutely agree. That was a fun band to play with, and it always kind of pushed me to my limits, but that was okay because I needed that. That's the adrenaline. That's when you get on stage with the Tony Rice unit, no matter what configuration it ever was, you better be there to you better show up to be able to play. I mean, there was no laying back ever, and that was just what made the unit, especially that configuration, because Ricky, um, I always thought in the back of my mind, I said, this guy's kind of a, a type A personality. He's always, got like 220 volts running through him. And and he played that way, he played hard, and he was just always on all the time. That pushed him, that pushed me, pushed Tony, and Wyatt, and Ronnie as well. The whole band just clicked because of the energy that was on stage. And I cannot recall a time when we ever let up our energy.
Mhm.
I cannot ever cite an instance where that ever happened.
Yeah. It's funny because I've had several people on the podcast who've played a lot with Jerry Douglas and Dan Tominski, people like that on the podcast. Ronnie Simpkins too, Mark Schatz, and I always ask them. I say, what was it about playing with Tony Rice that everybody always played just about the best in their career when they played with him? And they couldn't really put it into words. They just said when you were on stage or playing with him in the studio, you just wanted to be as good as you could be. I guess that's the best I can summarize
That's
their
a good way to
answers.
put it. Yeah, yeah, yeah. You you have um I can't say privilege, but it's when you get uh chosen to be a member of a band like that, and you've made it there, you are um I mean, that's it. That, to me, that was just about the epitome of where I could have gone at that point in my career. I couldn't think of any other band or place that I wanted to be. I wanted to be in that band. I was privileged to be in that band, and I didn't have to work at it really, but I uh, I fell into it and knew that I felt the groove all of the time. I felt the groove. I felt the blend. I felt the energy. And, people would come up to me at festivals and stuff and say, my friend, you have like the best job in bluegrass. And I'd say, hey, yeah, without having to elaborate or, pat myself on the back or anything. I say, yeah, I guess I do,
Yeah,
so.
yeah. It seemed like from no, I never saw that band live, but it seemed like you guys were having fun on stage, even though the music was serious. I mean, it was you were playing the best you could play at all times, but it seemed like there was a good amount of, I don't know, smiling and banter going on sometimes on stage. I don't know if that's true. I mean, I've only seen some videos, so I can't really say, but was it
Yeah,
fun?
yeah, it's a matter of attitude. Yeah,
Mhm.
and to be, if it was an 180, as they say, from that, if you didn't uh, have that approach, then then there would be an off day, and it would be kind of infectious. Somebody else would pick up on it and say, "What? Aren't you having a good time here?" So we all had a good time. We looked like we were having a good time because we actually were.
Yeah, yeah. I I was listening to one of your albums on YouTube, Gaudreau Mandolin album, 1978, and there's some comments. There's comments on YouTube about all the stuff. So some guy said Tony Rice used to call you Black Bart from Kmart. Is that true? I don't know. I just saw this comment. I said I got to ask him about that. I don't know where that came from.
I don't know where that comes from.
Okay,
Maybe
well,
it's
this
because
this
I
guy
have
seemed to know. I
blonde
don't know who he
hair
was.
and a really dark mustache and
Maybe that's what it
whatever, and
was.
look like a villain from the movies. You
Yeah, maybe
know,
you were like a pirate or something to him. Yeah, I just thought it was funny that
um,
phrase, Black Bart from Kmart. Maybe it was the you look like a pirate.
I got another story. Tony had a nickname for everybody. and I won't go into that, but everybody that he knew, he had some kind of a little nickname for. And while he was back in the very earliest days, when again I was living in Warrenton, and we were sitting around my family room picking some stuff, I said, "Well, I'm going to go out and pick up my mail." So I come back into the house, and I'm holding this envelope, and it's addressed to J. Gaudreau. Somebody had switched the G and the D, Daugreau, and I said, "Hey Tony, catch this, Dogro," and he said, "That's it." He says, "Johnny Dogro." He says, "That's your nickname from now on." And I said, "Ah, come on." He says, "No, it's perfect." He said, and that one stuck. It was Johnny Dogro, J. Dogro.
Wow, that's funny. That's hilarious. Yeah. So did he have a nickname for his brother too, or did he treat his brother kind of like? I know Wyatt's a lot younger, so I feel like he kind of was like protecting him in a way from, I don't know. What was that relationship? I want to talk about Tony and Wyatt because just watching them, and Wyatt's played here a few times with Tony at our series, and like, what was the relationship like? I know Wyatt idolized his brother, obviously, and learned to play a lot from him, but he had his own style too. Or you're looking at me like you want to
Well,
say something?
yeah, well, um, Wyatt was not part of the Tony Royce unit in California. Wyatt was living in California at the time, and Tony always introduced him on stage. This gentleman over here is 14 years my younger brother, so there was quite an age difference there, and and both Tony and Wyatt agreed that Tony never sat him down to show him anything. Wyatt just gravitated towards the guitar, listened to Tony, watched him close, and picked up his own rhythm style, which was uh, slightly different than Tony's. It was not a carbon copy by any means, but it blended so well. I mean, that's what I was talking about with this wall of rhythm. That between those two guys, there were no gaps whatsoever. There was rhythm that if you couldn't play with that rhythm, get off stage because you don't belong there. It was like a freight train, jumping on a freight train and holding on for dear life.
Yeah. It's funny you say that because when you and I've seen Tony play, in person here a few times as well as on video. Um, he's not really a heavy player, and he plays a lot on the high three strings with his rhythm playing. And then the two of them, you watch them together, they don't seem like they're playing a lot of heavy rhythm, and it's never overplayed. But yet, like you say, the drive is like, holy mackerel! However they achieved that, I don't know. I don't know how they did it,
Well, a
but
lot of
nobody
it
else
did have
ever.
to do, excuse me, a lot of it did have to do with Wyatt being in the background and filling up that gap. If Tony wanted to go up and play rhythm chords or whatever up the neck, Wyatt was still down in his rhythm position, whatever that happened to be, swatting it out with this big, thick sound, and it filled all the space, no matter
Yeah,
what Tony decided to do.
yeah. Do you still ever get together with Wyatt? I know he's busy teaching at ETSU, and I've been trying to get him on my podcast, and I've emailed him back and forth, but so far I haven't. He hasn't agreed to it. He doesn't really respond much. I guess he's a quiet guy. I think he keeps to himself and doesn't really want to talk about himself,
He,
maybe. But
he is a quiet guy. Yeah. Um, the actually the when I really got to know him was when I put together that short-lived band called the Bluegrass Unit, which there's a couple of albums out on Strictly Country called Jimmy Gaudreau's Bluegrass Unit. Well, that was a bunch of guys that I handpicked to go over to Europe and do a concert tour, which was very successful. And Wyatt was my choice for rhythm player in that band. Didn't need him to sing. He's a non-singer. And there were 4 lead vocalists in that band. But having traveled with him throughout Europe, I really got to know this guy and how special he was. Quiet, yes, but when he was away from Tony, he was like a different person. He opened up a lot more, and incredible. Just he presents himself exactly like he is. You know, he's a great player, just a really swell individual. And getting back to your original question, no, I don't really cross paths with him these days because although we both live in the state of Virginia, I'm up closer to D.C. and he's down in the southwest part near Abingdon, I think, or someplace, which is like many hours away, like 300 miles or something like that. And no, he's closer to the Tennessee border, therefore having the opportunity to teach at ETSU.
Yeah. Well, I'm going to keep trying to get Wyatt on. I mean, I always enjoyed it when he came, but like you say, Tony was always the focus, and Wyatt never said much to me except hi when he was here with Tony. That was about maybe one word I got. That was. I understand that. It was. I understand
If you
that.
do get him on, I wish you a lot of luck because he is indeed a quiet individual, and not you kind of have to coax it out of him, I guess.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
that's just his nature. He's just white.
His son Jordan, who's on Facebook a lot, calls Tony and Wyatt the Mangs. I guess that's his nickname for them. Mangs, the Mangs.
That came
I think
from Grisman.
okay.
Yep. That's a West Coast thing that Tony came back with after working with Grisman, and Grisman still uses that terminology. I haven't actually talked with him, but I'm in contact with Craig Miller, who is his business manager and put out the albums that on that label there. Gosh, now I have to think of it.
That acoustic disc, that
Acoustic
label.
disc, yes.
Yeah, that label.
Thank you for filling that in. I had one of my memory lapses, yeah. But that is one of the latest projects that Acoustic Disc have put out were live recordings of the Tony Rice unit. And when I do talk to Craig or go back and forth with him on via email, I always say hi to Mang for me, which is Grisman, who is also Dog, DAWG, but he's also to personal friends, Mang.
Yeah.
And Tony would say, "How you doing, Mang?"
It's funny. Yeah, I had David Grisman on, Todd Phillips. I really wanted to pursue in this podcast people with links to Tony and Bill Monroe. So I was able to get some great stories from David Grisman and Todd about the early days out there and when Tony came out and all that kind of stuff. It was some pretty funny stories, but so getting back to Wyatt, is there any other rhythm guitarist that can play like Wyatt, that really can like just play that strong rhythm so beautifully these days? I mean, I know you're out of the bluegrass world somewhat, but is there anybody else that can do that anymore?
Well, the first person that comes to mind is Richard Bennett, who I worked with, of course, in Aldridge Bennett Gaudreau. Richard is about as good as you'll ever hear on a rhythm guitar and lead guitar. A lot of people always made that connection. Is he trying to sound like Tony Rice? No, not really. Richard sounds like Richard, and if it happens to emulate Tony a little bit, well, then it was not that he intended it to be that way. Richard is just a great player.
Yeah. I also want to talk a little bit about another very good guitar player and singer that used to play with Glenn Lawson.
Yes. Uh,
Who, to me, I had never heard of him until I started doing research on your bands, and he was really a very fine leader, singer, guitar player. I mean, very, very good. I was considered like top echelon player and singer. Would you agree? Or he seems like he's kind of underrated or underrepresented in bluegrass. Maybe I'm just naive. I didn't know anything
uh,
about him.
well, you know what? After Tony and Ricky Skaggs and Jerry Douglas left the Tony Rice unit, ironically, right about the same time as that Rounder album came out that immortalized or changed bluegrass in such a big way. To JD was faced with having to rebuild the band, and that's like when I came in, and Glenn had started out being a mandolin player in his new configuration because JD had recruited Harley Allen to be the guitar player lead singer. And for some reason, I won't go into it, but that didn't last long. Harley decided to go back to Dayton and not be part of the JD Crow band. And that's when I got the call from JD, like, I need a mandolin player, tenor singer. And Glenn didn't want to play mandolin. He says, man, I want to be the guitar player. Because he says, that's where I feel most, natural. He says, I'm not a natural mandolin player or tenor singer. So I go down to Kentucky and fit into that configuration. And it worked out really, really well. I agree. Glenn Lawson is an incredibly good lead singer who I went on again to work with in Spectrum because
Mm.
I loved his lead singing.
Yeah. I know we emailed back and forth about Spectrum because I found that videos of that band with you and Bella Fleck, and I guess you were trying to get a hold of the guy who put the videos on YouTube. I guess you did get a hold of
Yeah.
him, maybe? Yeah,
Yes, I did. As a matter of
you
fact,
did.
thank you for that hookup.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, getting back to playing the mandolin in a bluegrass band, when you're playing mandolin in a band, um, and you're trying to keep the rhythm going, who are you keying off of? Are you keying off of the rhythm guitar player, or are you keying off the bass player to keep that 1, 2, 3, 4 rhythm, or is it just a feel of the whole band that you would uh, try to
Yeah.
get that pocket, I guess?
We refer to it as groove.
Groove.
When everybody's reading from the same page, you find yourself in a groove that no, you're not necessarily listening to the rhythm guitar or the bass, but because of the fact where I was positioned on stage, again with the Tony Rice unit, Tony was on one side of me, either Ronnie or Schatz was on the other side of me, and so I had it in both ears. And again, it was you didn't have to listen to fall into that. All you had to do is just be in the groove, and you were there. It was automatic, and it was you know just a blessing. You didn't have to listen to one or the other. Just you fell in to it and became
Yeah,
part of that sound.
yeah. I asked Todd Phillips this question, the bass player. He said he always keyed off the rhythm guitar, like as a bass player. That's what his what he was really listening to. That was his
Well,
answer.
that's true because a bass player would not necessarily listen to the mandolin player
Mhm.
um, because the mandolin, of course, is playing on the offbeat, the chop. So the bass player relies on the rhythm guitar player. And the other thing I want to tell you is that when Mark Schatz joined up, he followed the short stint with Todd Phillips. Todd Phillips was actually the original bass player in the Tony Rice unit that I was in, and
Mhm.
because of logistics, Todd didn't want to relocate to the East Coast, and therefore Tony says, we need a bass player that's, from around here. And I personally gave Mark Schatz the call and recruited him into the band. And when he got there, Tony basically told him the same guidelines as he told me, and said, I remember this distinctly because Mark Schatz was a trained bass player who used to use a metronome to practice with. And first thing Tony says, two things: put away your tuner and put away that metronome. He says, because they are not allowed in on stage or anywhere near me. He says, I use a tuning fork. I put it on my guitar. It's tuned to A, and you listen to that A and you tune to that A. You do not tune to an electronic tuner. And if my rhythm slows, or he says, bluegrass has got to float. And he made this motion kind of with his hand like a wave. He says, do not play like a metronome. Play with me. He says, and if I slow or speed, you slow or speed with me. And it was subtle, and sometimes unnoticeable. And I never really paid any attention to it because I'm off in my own world, just not keying off on one or the other. And maybe I'm a little bit off, but not so much as you would notice, because everything eventually found the groove, whether it was speeding a little bit or slowing just a little bit. It flowed, and it always flowed. And that was the thing about the Tony Rice unit, is it just did what it wanted to do and pulled it off.
I remember Todd Phillips mentioning that too. He said, the band was like a train. It was going down the track, but the individual passengers on the train could, move around a little bit, slow, fast, but the train kept its momentum and its speed.
Mm-hmm.
It wasn't like the song slowed down. It was just like the parts and the phrasing in between. And as you say, it might not even be noticeable because a lot of stuff I wouldn't even notice it. But he would say, "Oh yeah, we would follow Tony. Sometimes he would go faster or slower, but the overall song was still moving at the same pace, pretty much. It's just that within it was variety."
Yeah, he put it nicely, saying that it was like a freight train, and you jump aboard and you're on for the ride.
Mm-hmm.
And if it does speed or slow, you do whatever it does, and just hang in there and wait till the song ends. Then you're done and go on to something else and back in another groove.
I just had a concert here last night at our house, a house concert with Tony Furtado, the banjo slide player from Oregon, and Matt Flinner was playing mandolin, and
great player.
Yeah, he's played here. Yeah. So I was talking to Matt. I had bought a mandolin recently, and I said, Matt, what are your tips for tuning? Like, how do you tune your mandolin? He says, well, I use a tuner, but he says I usually sometimes tune the G strings a little flat and the E strings a little sharp to get a good sound on his mandolin. Now, do you have any tricks for tuning a mandolin like that, or you just like, how do you tune your mandolin?
I still mostly revert to the Tony Rice thing that stuck with me all of these years. I do have a tuning fork, and I use my ear. Very rarely. I'm sorry. I'm in my office, and that's my phone ringing again. So, duh.
Okay, I'm not even hearing it. So
okay. Well, I heard the ring, and I just took it off the hook, and I should just disconnect it. Anyway, where were we talking about?
Tuning, how you tune your mandolin.
Tuning. I basically tune up by ear and use the strings, the octaves, like an open A, and then the first string, the fifth fret, of whatever, to get the octave note. And if it matches up, the first thing you got to have is a mandolin that is set up right and intonates right. And that's the trick. Once you get your mandolin in good intonation, then that's half the battle right there.
Yeah. Yeah. Changing the topic completely. Did you ever have another job outside of music since you started playing music, or were you always playing music as your income source and full-time job right through?
Um, the only time that I ever, well, out of high school, I took a job um, with a company in my home state of Rhode Island um, that made big industrial machines called Brown and Sharp, and they had a very highly acclaimed internship program that I was trying to get into. So I worked there in hopes of getting an internship, and when that failed because uh, there was still I was still playing music on the side, so I didn't want to be a machinist or anything like that, and uh, finally got out of that, got the call to play music, came down to the DC area. And while I didn't have any other jobs then, but when I moved to Warrenton, where I hooked up with Tony, uh, I had left my second stint with the Country Gentlemen. I played with them from 69 to 71, and then from 81 to 85 when I joined with Tony Rice. Well, the second time that I joined the Country Gentlemen, it was a uh, salaried position. I got paid on a weekly or monthly basis, whatever it was, whether I worked or not. And that's the steadiest money I think I ever made in my life. And it was
Mm,
the hardest to leave because, I was faced with the choice after Tony said, you know, I'm putting together this band. And it was like, security,
mm,
to toss my fate to the wind with Tony Rice. But then again, if I pass up a chance to work with Tony Rice, I will never forgive myself. I'll never get this chance again. So I just did it, and while in the early days of the Tony Rice unit, I still had a family to support, wife and daughter, and I took a job that I picked up on in the local newspaper down there. I forget what it was, the Fauquier, which is the county, Fauquier County Democrat. I just happened to be reading the newspaper and said, we're looking for somebody that can drive a limousine. Well, the other thing is not my other interest in life was I'm a car guy. I mean,
mm.
always have been. Mike Aldridge and I spent hours and hours talking about cars, and I still love them to this day.
I see
And
cars in the background in your room there. I see models, photos, all kinds of car stuff back there.
oh yeah, yeah, all over the place. Yeah,
Yeah.
I'm just, and as a matter of fact, I still have my 2014 Mustang, which you'll see on my website, that uh, I will never get rid of because it is the perfect car for me. It's an
Mhm.
old guy's toy, so to speak.
Mhm.
But anyway, getting back to the other job, I took this job driving limousine because I liked cars. I had driven buses and big vehicles, motorhomes before, and I said, "Yeah, I can do this." So I bluffed my way into this limousine thing, and that kind of morphed into another job because, again, down in the Warrenton area, there's a lot of old money down there, families that have just, really big time.
Mm.
And I got hooked up with an uh, a lady that was in her late 80s and used this limo company as drivers for her private chauffeuring. And I got hooked into that. And I'll tell you what, those gigs paid really, really good. And I did that for all the time that I lived in Warrenton.
Yeah.
And it was fun, except when you had to drive a stretch limousine down downtown DC. That was not fun.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
anyway, yeah.
I remember I had Doyle Lawson on the podcast earlier, and he was when he was playing with, I guess, Jimmy Martin. I said, "What were you making?" He said he would pay us $15 a week back in the day. Do you remember what you made as a salary just with the country gentleman? Any idea?
The
Just
first
for
time around,
yeah, just for
going into it was $100 a week.
$100
Yeah,
a week.
cash, and it was a little bit less than I was making at this machine shop in Rhode Island, but
Hmm.
not so much less. I mean, uh, the thing was that, when I got the call to join the Country Gentlemen, Duffy had already quit. And I got the call from Dick Freeland, who founded and ran Rebel Records. And he said, "This is Dick Freeland. Here's the story." And 2 minutes later, he said, "We're looking for a mandolin player, tenor singer, and we got your name. Are you interested in the job?" And, well, can I call back? No, I need an answer, yes or no, that quickly. He says, "We need somebody like right now." And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, pack your bags, get on a plane, come on down." And I'm not really embellishing that story. That's
Mm.
really what happened.
Yeah.
Like, pack your bags, come on down, and you come with good references. So, and we understand that you know a lot of country gentleman songs. And I said, "Yeah, I do." So, got on the plane, come down to DC, voila. Next thing you know, I'm playing a gig like 2 days later with the Country Gentlemen.
Did you have a relationship or friendship with John Duffy either before when he was in the band or after he left the band, or any
After I
words
left,
of advice from John Duffy that you were replacing in the band?
I'll tell you what, one of the things that we had that enabled them to pay me my $100 a week was they had a steady job at a little club in Georgetown, DC, called the Shamrock, and they played that a couple of nights a week. And I can remember, just as sure as I'm sitting here, the night that I'm on stage and you could hear whispers going through the crowd. Duffy just walked in. Duffy just walked in, and it was like I could look down at my pants leg and watch it shaking, like that. Oh my God. I had maybe met John at a festival years earlier, but I'd never really got to know him. And he and his wife didn't sit up front. They took a table in the middle of the room, and the break came about, and John called me over to the table and said, "Hey, Jimmy, come over." And shook my hand. He said, "Pleasure to meet you." And I sat down at the table, and it was just kind of loose talk. And he said, "I really enjoy what you're doing." He says, "Your mandolin playing," he says, "is really impressive." He said, and you seem to be, your voice is different than mine, of course." He says, "And it's really working." He says, "And if I was going to give you one tip, not that you're asking for one, but," he says, "this is," and I said, "John," I said, "anything you're about to tell me, I am going to listen to." He says, "You need to learn to sell it. That's all you really need to do." He says, "Because you impress me as a great technician. Your playing is good, your singing is good, but your salesmanship needs a lot of work." And end of story. That stuck with me like forever.
Was he right?
He was absolutely right. Yeah, yeah. And I did work at it and ran into him after things, after he had joined the Seldom Scene. And, he would see me at festivals and he'd say, "You're selling it a little bit better these days." He says, "But you could still," he says, "you still need some improvement." And then he'd smile and kind of pat me on the back and he'd say, "Get out there."
It's funny. There are some videos of the country gents with you. I think they're black and white videos of you in concert where you were doing a lot of talking and joking around with Charlie Waller, and a lot of shenanigans were going on. A little more interest to the crowd. I mean, I just say that a lot of musicians today have lost that element of entertainment in their playing. They're very good players. A lot of these young players are amazing players, but there's not much joking around connection. Sometimes they don't even look at the audience. They just play to themselves. It just bugs me.
Well, that's what was pointed out to me by John Duffy. He was the consummate entertainer, and before he left the group, he was also the front man. Charlie, when I joined the group, had to adapt to that position himself, and he wasn't really comfortable in doing so. It took him a while to kind of loosen up and be, the front man of the group. And John was, with the seldom seen, it was his nature to be an entertainer. He was a natural, guy at the microphone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, Looking back at your life in music, is there anybody in music that you would have liked to have played with and never got a chance to play with, maybe just informally or on the couch? Or I know you played with a lot of people. Is there anybody that you like feel like you missed out on an opportunity that you could have played or wanted to play with somebody different?
Hmm. You know what? That's a hard question to answer, and nobody comes to mind right off the bat because I would have to go back a long, long way. I think to even guess. Um, Again, because I've really satisfied um, my own, uh, everything that I've wanted to do in music. I pretty much have, and I've been very lucky, very fortunate to have played with that list of lead singers. John Starling, Emmylou Harris, Tony Rice, Keith Whitley, Charlie Waller, Glenn Lawson, Richard Bennett. I mean, the list goes on. Mooney Klein, that was. Um, I got to tell you, that was the find of the century right there when I got hooked up with him, because you talk about a vocal blend. We had a vocal blend. People would say, you guys are switching off because I know you can sing tenor and I know that he can sing tenor and I know that you're switching in between. He says, but I can't tell who's singing what. And I said, that's not intentional. It's just the way it is. And we found that to be, the biggest asset that we had is that we could switch off and nobody could tell.
That's funny because we do some hot rise songs in our classes, and we're listening to them at home. Everyone is, and trying to figure out which part Tim O'Brien is singing and which part the bass player Nick Forster is singing.
Yeah.
And it's sometimes you just can't tell. It's like one voice, but they're not singing the same note, but you can't tell which one is doing which.
I,
It's
I,
amazing.
you know what? The first time that I saw Hot Rise, I had that same thing impression. I said, I know that they're switching off, or that their blend is so good that you can't discern who's doing what. I said because, yeah, Nick and Tim, that was one of the best duo vocals I think I've ever heard in my life. It was like the proverbial brother team, the Everly brothers, the Osborne brothers, whatever. They just, you could not tell.
Right.
And Mooney and I had the same thing. We weren't remotely related, but we just had vocal textures or whatever that were conducive to each other.
Yeah. Do you ever perform at all these days, like even like a little house concert kind of thing, or is that era over?
No, the answer is a definite no. I do not.
Okay.
When I quit performing, it was back. Well, the pandemic did have something to do with it. Mooney and I were doing a lot of duo dates up until that point, and when the pandemic hit, it stopped for pretty much everybody. I mean, you couldn't solicit a date, you couldn't go out and play with a mask on or anything, and it was during a time of my uh, revelation. I guess I got a revelation that, you know, my playing is not going to get any better in the next forever, how long this goes on. And the question is, should I pick up where I left off? And by the time that music started coming back around again, I just decided, no, that I am going to be among the retired, not the guy that says I'm retiring and then goes back into it because somebody says, "Oh, you still got a little left in you. Why don't you get back out and perform?" No, I am not going to be that guy.
Yeah. Well, that's a good no. Is there anything else that you'd like to talk about? We're hour and 15 minutes here, and it's been fascinating. It just flew by. Is there anything else you'd like to add? I just wanted to reiterate that people should check out your website because it's full of the pictures alone are worth a visit. I mean, it's just so
I
many
put a
great
lot of work
photos.
into that. Yeah, and if you want to go to jimmygaudreau.com and just go through it, yeah, I think it is. I did have mandolin players in mind when I put that section into it because I wanted people to know about my earliest mandolin, 1964, up until present day, and everything in between that I
Mhm.
used as a performance instrument and talk about it. So there's a lot of stories there, and I have in front of me. I have all of my handwritten notes because I will confess one of the last things I will confess to. I'm not really a typist, and but my wife is, and so I have legal pads just chock full of handwritten notes that I put together over the many months that she had to edit and go back through and finally that's why I put you off, actually so long. I said I want to get this done and up and running so that I don't have to have my mind on anything else. And there it is, it's up and running.
Yeah, I know. So are these notes the precursor to Jimmy Gaudreau's story of bluegrass history book, like my story? Are you gonna do a book?
No,
No.
but I will admit that I did an interview a while back with Alex McLeod there from the lead singer with Rock Hearts, who
Right.
is indeed putting together a book. And he solicited a bunch of people, sent me, it's called History of Bluegrass in New England. So I'm looking at what he sent me, interview questions, because of, I'm from Rhode Island. I actually got into professional music coming from Rhode Island. Tell me your story. And it's almost a number that you can count on at least two hands anyway, the people that come from Rhode Island or New England rather, that have made any impact in music. But he's taken the time to document it into a book, and I can't wait till it comes out because it's
Yeah.
going to be dandy.
Yeah. He actually, now that you've mentioned, he emailed me about this, and I said, well, Connecticut, we had Phil Rosenthal. You probably know Phil Rosenthal, who
I know him well.
sang. Yeah, he lives very close to me, and I was actually in a band with him, uh, one of my few bands. But I said you should talk to Phil because there were venues around New Haven where Bill Monroe and the Stanleys played here, and Phil had a band here. I mean, there was a big scene here too. So I'm curious to see that book. I've Alex has played here a couple of times with his band, and yeah, that's going to be fabulous to see what he comes up with. What he comes up with. Well, I think I just want to thank you for coming on. It was fascinating. You talked about everything I was hoping you would talk about, and in
And
great
more.
detail. Well, that's the whole point of a podcast, is to have people talk about their lives. So I do appreciate that, and I thank you. And maybe I'll meet you in person someday. I know we've never met, but I'm not that. Well, I am kind of far from where you are now, but I was going to say I'm not
Well,
that
you're
far from
almost.
Rhode Island, but you're not in Rhode
Uh,
Island.
I rarely make it back up there these days because,
Yeah.
again, I'll be honest with you. Um, I got burned out on traveling with one of I won't name the band, but I was with a band that traveled a lot. And during that time, it just kind of wore me out. So getting into a vehicle and looking out a windshield is not my idea of a good time these days. And, jumping on a plane, yeah, maybe we'll see. But
Yeah.
you're always welcome to, if you're in the DC area, give me a call, stop by, and we'll have dinner
Okay.
on the deck.
Okay, sounds good. All right. Well, thanks again for coming on, and good luck with everything. And hope to meet you at some point down the road. Thank you, Jimmy.
My pleasure. Thank you, Chris.
I hope you enjoyed our podcast, and thanks for listening. Visit our website, guitartownct.com, for concert and podcast schedules, or just to send us a message. We'd love to hear from you.